whatever. You're, you're welcome, sweetie, the baby dragon stammered. Oh, what a pimp. She smiled and turned back to her reading, falling into the routine she had cultivated over the last 2 weeks, and the dragon, after raising an eyebrow at her choice of literature, let her be. He knew from experience not to interrupt an obvious bibliophile. Pretty big words, but I get them, I know what they mean, so. It was much later that the door to the library clicked open as the lock was released. Spike perked up as the door swung open to admit a pair of unicorn mares into the room. I'm really worried, Trixie, Rarity said, her eyes reflecting her assertion. Sweetie was not at home when I arrived. I've looked all over Ponyville for her. I went as far as Sweet Apple Acres and their clubhouse, but I think we found her, Trixie said softly, motioning with a hoof for silence. The designer blinked and followed Trixie's gaze towards the center of the library. Sweetie Belle was sleeping, her head resting on the pages of an enormous tome, and snoring softly. She came here a while ago, Spike said quietly. She was crying. I didn't really know what to do. I made her some tea, and she just sat there drinking it and reading that book. The two mares stared at the little filly as they made their way to the table. Despite how long it had been since she had arrived, Sweetie still sniffled a bit in her sleep. Kinetic fields, from the simple to the prismatic. Damn, Trixie read aloud. She's certainly trying her best to learn that shield spell. Too bad Twilight isn't so insistent on theory. It might benefit her to have a bit of hooves-on experience. Are you saying you believe her about Twilight? Just look at her, Trixie interrupted. She's almost certainly Twilight's apprentice. No other unicorn would force such an instant filly to sit down and read that. Rarity looked at her sister, sorrow flooding onto her eyes. Oh, sweetie. The younger unicorn shifted. Just a bit more sleep, Twi. I promise I'll do those questions later. Equations later. I'm not thinking straight. She mumbled as she cuddled up to the book. Rarity blinked. Sweetie, it's time to go to bed. She's in bed, basically. Oh, all right, Twilight. Sweetie Belle, yawning and bleary-eyed, ignored the lot of them as she made her way upstairs towards the guest room. Sweetie, wait! The white unicorn spoke up, raising a hoof to stop her sister, but an Azor hoof on her own stopped her. She turned to look at the blue unicorn in surprise. Let her stay over, Trixie said, looking at the filly as she walked into the room and shut the door behind her. It seems that she's rather familiar with the library. A bit too familiar, perhaps, Rarity said, slightly perturbed. You calling Twilight a pedophile? She didn't even have to open her eyes. She just knew where to go. And which step to skip to avoid the creaking, Trixie observed. Just how many times has she been here studying? Rarity wondered. Just once. Meaning today, Spike muttered. As far as I know. Yet another mystery, Trixie smirked. But we should all rest. It's been a long day. I'll take care of Sweetie. Rarity hesitated, remembering the filly's words from earlier. Trixie, do you think something could be wrong with Sweetie? She's not acting like herself. I don't know. Yet, the blue unicorn said, stealing a glance at Spike. You say she's only been here studying today? Spike gave her a look. Trixie, you know as well as I do that today's... Sorry about that awkward pause. Spike gave her a look. Trixie, you know as well as I do that today's the first day she's willingly stepped into the library by herself and studied. He looked thoughtful for a moment. But I had no idea she could do magic already. Like, she levitated the teacup out of my hands. And she knew about my special blend of... Special blend? Trixie raised an eyebrow. The dragon sighed. I have a special tea that Sakura made for me a while ago. Most ponies don't like how spicy it is, but even less know about it. Until now, I thought that only Sakura, Twilight, and I knew. Okay, so that's part 1. I'm going to read part 2 right now! I'm running out of time. Zebrakin tea. That's an acquired flavor. At least for ponies, Trixie smiled, recalling her travels. Did you know that when hoof-gathering the leaves, they actually separate the leaves by freshness? They have 2 versions, you see. Can we talk about tea later? Rarity interrupted. Well, Rarity don't like the fine art of tea, I guess. I hate to be so short with you. I'm sure it would be an enlightening conversation under better circumstances. But I'm worried about my little sister. Trixie smiled weakly. Apologies. In any case, I will talk to her when she wakes up. It does seem rather strange how she believes herself to have lived the past week so differently." She stopped, eyes widening. "Trixie?" The fashionista looked at her worried. "What's happening to Sweetie Belle?" I... The showmare shook her head, briefly considering not telling Rarity anything. However, she knew the white unicorn was very good at picking up on little details and would know if Trixie was lying. Showmare sighed. "I think I might know what's happening. It's highly unlikely, but... What is it? Is it dangerous? Is she losing her mind?" Rarity asked, starting to panic, eyes widening with each imagined horror. "No, no." Trixie patted the fashionista's shoulders with her hoof. "I'm uncertain if it is indeed what I am thinking. It's not a bad thing or particularly dangerous, and as far as I know it only happens to rhinos." She raised her hoof to forestall further questions. "So, I may simply be jumping to conclusions, Rarity. Let me speak with her when she wakes up and I'll find out for sure. It is nothing bad, and it is very unlikely, that is. Okay?" "So why can't you tell me?" "Because you would worry unnecessarily and begin looking for facts to fit the theory rather than seeing if the theory fits the facts." Rarity still looked dubious, but finally nodded her assent, casting a worried glance towards the guest room. "I see. I I suppose I can see why you would say that. Please, take care of her." Trixie smiled warmly. "Of course. The great and powerful Trixie can handle a single filly. You needn't worry at all." Then the library gets burned down. It was still nighttime when Sweetie Belle awoke. She rubbed her blurry eyes and looked around. She was in the guest room at Twilight's house. That's how it was written. It sounded awkward, but okay. She took in a deep breath, her thoughts running through her recent experiences. "I guess it was all a dream," she shivered. "Or a nightmare, more like." She looked out of the window. The moon wasn't that high in the sky, so it was still relatively early, for a mentor at least. She would either be stargazing or reading in her room. God damn it. Sweetie shivered again and looked at the room for a second time. "There is something weird going on." "But what?" She slid out of bed and sighed as she walked towards the door. Maybe talking to Twilight would help. As expected, the light seeping from underneath Twilight's bedroom indicated that the mare was awake. She could hear the soft rumbling snores of a baby dragon coming from within the room. Sweetie took a deep breath and knocked twice on the door before entering. "Twilight? I'm sorry to be up so late, but I had the strangest dream." Lying on Twilight's bed, comfortably reading a book as if she owned the place, was Trixie. This home invasion crap's getting old. The unicorn looked up at Sweetie and raised an eyebrow. "What the... Hey!" Sweetie stepped back, eyes wide as the showmare slowly stepped down from the bed. "Are you feeling better, Sweetie?" she asked, tilting her head to the side as she examined the little filly. "What are you doing here?" Sweetie began fearfully, before the questions began to spill forth rapidly. "What's happening here? What'd you do with Twilight? You erased every pony's memory so they wouldn't know you killed her, didn't you?" The showmare's eyes widened a bit, but then she smiled and chuckled. "Well, I'm not called the great and powerful Trixie for nothing, but I dare say brainwashing every pony is still a bit outside my current abilities. Not to mention that killing a Twilight's the last thing I'd ever want to do." "But what are you doing here?" Sweetie asked. "Hush," Trixie said, pointing at the snoring dragon. "Let's go downstairs so we don't wake Spike." Barely able to contain her questions, the filly followed the older unicorn downstairs. She watched silently as Trixie levitated a teapot onto the stove and began to throw a mix of herbs she pulled from a container that she didn't recall ever seeing in a library before. What is that?" the filly asked. "My own special zebrakin tea blend." Trixie smiled. "What? You thought Spike had the only secret stash?" Once tea was ready, the showmare sat down, placing both cups of tea on the table. "Now, Sweetie, this might come as a shock to you, but I live here at Twilight. We've been living together in the library for almost a year now." "What? But..." The filly shook her head. "That can't be right. I've been studying with Twilight for the last 2 weeks, and the last time I saw you, you almost killed me. And Twilight certainly wasn't happy to see you." A flash of hurt crossed Trixie's eyes. "Those are words I'd rather never have to hear." "Huh?" "Exactly." Trixie smiled as she slowly stirred her tea. "Tell me, Sweetie, how do you feel?" "Confused. Really, really confused." the filly confessed, staring morosely at the cup. The inviting scents emanating from the tea were making her mouth water, but she had to wait, lest she burn her tongue and lips before recalling Twilight's spell and cooling down the tea a bit. That's good. If you know you are confused, then you know something is not right. The showman looked at the library. Think about how things were and how things are. Tell me, what's different? Start with the small things. Well, the filly frowned at the thought. My stuff was in my room upstairs, she said, feeling a bit dumb for not realizing it earlier. And the book I was reading had fewer pages. So, even if some pony had managed to brainwash all of us, do you think they would go in enough detail to change that? Sweetie looked down. No. Well, Applebloom and Screwloo weren't in town. Neither was Rarity the last 2 weeks. I can tell you for certain that all 3 of them had been here at the same time, Trixie said, motioning for Sweetie to drink some of her tea. Slowly, the filly levitated the cup just like Trixie was doing and took a sip. She looked at the tea in the cup in surprise. This is really good, the showman smirked. I figured, since you like the spicy tea, I would like this one too. You would like this one too. I got it during my travels with the zebras. Sweetie drank more tea before putting down her cup. So, are you going to tell me that you're not a wanted felon? She had to dodge that to the side to avoid being sprayed with tea as Trixie spit what she was drinking. What? You released 2 werewolves in the middle of Ponyville, Sweetie said, glaring at her. I almost got killed. But I would never... Trixie took a deep breath. Okay, now I'm fairly certain I know what the problem is. Sweetie blinked. While I was traveling with the rhinos... What's a rhino? Sweetie interrupted. Trixie arched an eyebrow. Great lumbering beasts with poor eyesight, but with grand magical traditions that go back thousands of years. Almost as long as the zebras. Oh. Anyway, they have a ritual which allowed them to see beyond this world and into others. Trixie continued. I never experienced it first hoof, because only they seemed to be able. But it would have allowed them to find themselves in other dimensions, across time and space itself, and see and experience those other worlds through the actions of their counterparts. Sweetie Belle stared at her, silent. Trixie blinked. Did you understand any of that? Nope, Sweetie said, but some of it sounded familiar. I think. She closed her eyes and tried to remember. I think the experiment where... She choked. Go on, Sweetie. What experiment? The one where... She couldn't bring herself to say the words. An overwhelming feeling of guilt settled on her as she looked at Trixie's worried gaze. It was... last night. In Twilight, she... Sweetie closed her eyes. I think I killed Twilight, she confessed as she collapsed on the floor. I didn't know! Trixie dropped her cup, the sound of it shattering lost in Sweetie's sobs. You what? I'm sorry, she bawled. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to get something while she worked. Trixie looked at the filly, mind racing. It's okay, Sweetie. Just calm down and tell me what happened. Slowly, between sobs and suddenly finding herself in the surprisingly comforting 4 legs of Trixie, Sweetie Belle explained what she had done and what she had seen. And then she broke into pieces, the filly sniffed. I saw a flash and I woke up in my room. I thought it was all a bad dream. She started shaking. Trixie felt cold, having imagined that here happening to her Twilight. And you said that the thing she was experimenting on affected time and space? Sweetie nodded morosely, not even looking up at her. The showman slowly stroked the filly's mane. It was an accident, Sweetie, and I don't want you to give false hope, but when things like that happen, you cannot simply trust your eyes. What do you mean? Sweetie asked, her eyes red from crying and rubbing at them. There's a chance that Twilight, your Twilight, is still alive, Trixie said carefully. Your perceptions of what happened could have been affected by the magic. I believe that's how you were sent to this dimension. Maybe the same happened to her. So, this isn't my real home? The filly sniffled. I'm afraid not. That's why everything you remember is so different. But then, Applebloom wasn't lying, and she got punished worse because of me! Trixie nodded. There's not much we can do about that right now. We'll sort it out tomorrow. For now we should sleep. I'll ask Spike to send a letter to Twilight. She may know how to get you home. Sweetie yawned and nodded. Thanks, Trixie. She stood up and went upstairs, leaving Trixie alone. With a sigh, the unicorn conjured up a blank scroll and a quill. Soon the only noise in the library was the scratching of pill on parchment. Man, this is so good so far. Next morning, Trixie trotted down the stairs slowly to a pair of youthful voices. So, then you had the bananas now? Spike's voice drifted from the kitchen. Like this? Came Sweetie's voice a second later. Yep, nicely done. Now, press them down a little bit so that the batter goes all around it. Yeah, like that, Spike instructed. What's going on here? Trixie asked, walking to the kitchen with a sleepy grin. Morning, Trixie, Spike called, smiling at her. Sweetie Belle smiled brightly, waved a hoof excitedly at the show mare. Spikey's teaching me how to make the princess's favorite pancakes. Okay, concentrate, Spike interrupted, shifting the little unicorn's attention back to the task before them. You see how the batter's starting to bubble? That means that they're almost ready to be turned over. Lift up the side of the pancake a bit. Once that looks a bit more solid, use your magic to flip them. Sweetie concentrated in 3 of the pancakes glowing as they flipped under her control, while Spike expertly flipped 5 others with a spatula. They waited a little bit before placing the pancakes onto a platter which went straight into the preheated oven. To keep them warm, Spike explained when Sweetie asked why. Trixie watched in bemusement as a pair of youngsters produced batch after batch of pancakes. It wasn't long before they had run out of room in the oven, and the group sat down to eat. I think I will take over your training for today, Sweetie, Trixie declared after a pause in the meal. Twilight is not due back until late afternoon, I would think. And honestly, that mare puts far too much emphasis on theory and not enough on execution. I think you need a bit more hooves-on practice to get that shield working. Sweetie looked at the older unicorn in surprise. Really? You'll help? Trixie nodded. Why? Of course! The great and powerful Trixie could not simply leave her beloved apprentice unattended to stagnate in her education. Twilight would have my hide for such an offense. So, get ready. We'll stop by Carousel Boutique to tell Rarity you'll be with me today. Sweetie could not only nod dumbly as Trixie walked out of the kitchen. Did she just call Twilight her beloved? She squeaked, wide-eyed, as she turned to look at Spike for confirmation. Yeah, the little dragon nodded, munching happily a somewhat burnt pancake. I thought every pony knew, what with the duel and the competition in Canterlot. But what about Big Mac? Sweetie asked. Spike blinked. What about him? I always thought he had a thing for Twilight. I even saw them... Sweetie stammered out before stopping herself short. Stupid Sweetie. I forgot this isn't my home. Even saw them what? Spike said, raising an eyebrow. Nothing, Sweetie smiled. I should get my mane ready. You know. She trailed off in his expression. Because my sister, who dislikes messy manes. I go now. Spike watched as she ran out of the kitchen before shrugging. Well, better get this cleaned up if I want to go with them to see Rarity. Spike sighed as he absentmindedly began to wash the dishes. The walk towards Carousel Boutique was quiet. There were lots of things that Sweetie wanted to ask Trixie, specifically what to tell Rarity, but Spike's presence made her feel uncomfortable talking about something that felt so personal. She really wasn't looking forward to this. What am I going to tell Sis? Is she really my sis? Should I talk to her at all? She grew more and more nervous as the boutique came into view. What should I do? What should I do? She looked wild-eyed at Trixie, who looked back calmly. Don't worry. I'm sure your sister will understand if you need a day to sort things out. You'll be with me, so she needn't worry. Sweetie Belle exhaled as she felt herself relax a bit at Trixie's words. I guess if she's my sister back home, she's still my sister here, she smiled. I'm sure we're as close here as we were there. Like apple pie. As soon as they reached the boutique, the door opened and Rarity was looking at Sweetie Belle with a worried expression. Good morning, Sweetie. The fashionista trailed off, unsure of what to say next. Sweetie looked down and scratched at the floor of a hoof. Morning, sis. The two looked very uncomfortable, just standing there, avoiding one another's gaze before Trixie finally cleared her throat. Good morning, Rarity. I talked to Sweetie, and she wishes to practice magic with me today, and hopefully to clear her mind. We came here to see if that was okay. We did? Spike asked, cringing as he received glares from every pony present. I guess we did. Rarity glanced over her shoulder at the tea and muffins. Tea, set, and muffins she had procured for a quiet talk with Sweetie. If that is what you want, Sweetie, she said, looking back to the pair of unicorns in front of her. I do, sis, Philly said after a moment, but I also wanted to talk to you, and Skooloo and Applebloom. But I need some time. Rarity sighed. It's okay, Sweetie. I'm sorry I made you feel so bad and I accused you of lying. She was suddenly being crushed by a hug from the unicorn filly. "I'm sorry I'm making you worry, sis," Sweetie cried. "I just have a lot to think about. I promise I'll tell you everything." Rarity smiled, nuzzling the filly affectionately. "I can work with that," she reassured her sister. "Well, we should get going," Trixie said, casting suspicious glances around. "I'd rather be out of here before I get challenged again." "Good luck, then," Rarity said as the trio turned around and started walking away. "Thanks, sis. See you soon," Sweetie called over her shoulder. Spike waved half-heartedly as he rode on Trixie's back, watching his beloved Rarity walk through the boutique. Trixie led them out of town and towards the edge of the Everfree forest, stopping just shy of entering Everfree proper. "I think we're far enough," she turned around to face Sweetie Belle. "Okay, now we'll start with you trying the spell while I throw something at you. If your spell works, the shield should stop it." Sweetie blinked. Twilight always told me that I should understand everything about the spell before." Twilight waved a hoof dismissively. "Twilight worries too much. Trust me, I didn't spend several months tied in a high magic competition with her without knowing what I was doing." "But it's okay. I won't throw anything dangerous at you," Trixie encouraged. That is how the zebras train their young warriors." "But I'm not a zebra." "Well, you like the spicy tea, so you could be," Spike said after a moment. "I mean, you'd need stripes, but she has stripes in her mane." Trixie rolled her eyes and levitated a small dirt clod. "Ready?" "No." "Well, here it goes." "But I—" Sweetie's eyes widened as they followed the patch of dirt. She jumped out of the way. "Hey! I said I wasn't ready!" "You cheated!" Trixie called back, grinning. "You're not supposed to dodge. You're supposed to cast a shield spell." Spike didn't look amused. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" He looked at the Azored unicorn. "Yes," Trixie admitted, keeping her eyes and her grin trained on the little filly. Sweetie kept a wary eye on the show mare. "I knew I shouldn't trust her," she muttered, only to watch in horrified fascination as Trixie levitated many, many pieces of dirt and positioned them right over the pair. When the sky was furtively blotted out by small balls of dirt, Sweetie decided that it was best to be someplace else, and promptly found that she couldn't move. Too late did she notice the faint blue aura surrounding her hooves. She looked up at Trixie in despair. The show mare smirked at her. The dirt balls above her shot down in Sweetie's direction. Spike, watching from a safe distance away, closed both of his eyes for a split second, but soon enough opened one to take a peek. With a huge splat made out of smaller splats, Sweetie Belle was buried under hundreds of dirt balls. "Why?" Sweetie asked after a moment. "That's not fair." She shook off some of the dirt, but most of her coat was completely covered in it. Trixie chuckled, looking proudly at the filly. "But, Sweetie, you cast a spell." Sweetie blinked and looked at her coat. She had been almost completely covered in dirt. "No, I didn't." The showmare shook her head, smile still in place. "Look at your mane, you silly filly." Sweetie looked up as much as she could. "One moment." Trixie transmuted a small rock into a mirror before levitating it before the young unicorn. "Here." Sweetie stared at her reflection. Just like the showmare had said, there's not a speck of dust or dirt on her mane. "I did it?" she asked in wonder. "I did it! Yay!" Out of habit, she turned to look at her flank. Was there something there? Even for just a second? "Are you ready for another Are you ready for another try?" Trixie called as she watched the filly spin around, trying to see if she had a cutie mark. "Yes!" They spent most of the morning practicing. Once Sweetie had figured out how to make a shield big enough to cover her completely from falling dirt, Trixie had changed tactics, hurling clods from all directions. Some were stopped by the shield, but most of the time Sweetie was unable to cast the spell quickly enough to avoid getting hit. Trixie had then alternated between practicing the shield spell to practicing prestidigitation, and finally having Sweetie levitate 3 balls, which they would toss back and forth between them. As they did, the show mare began to describe the competition she had had with Twilight Sparkle, both of them throwing hundreds of balls at each other. To say the little filly was impressed would be an understatement. "I'm pretty sure the Trixie from my world would never be able to do that," she had thought to herself on more than one occasion, but she was nevertheless thrilled that Twilight, or this world's version, had proven herself so powerful and resourceful as well. "I think that is enough for now," Trixie said, looking down at the now brown-coated filly covered in darker patches of dirt panting in front of her. "Rarity is going to kill me. I know it." "I think most of it will come out in the bath." Sweetie looked down at herself, taking several deep breaths before closing her eyes and shaking herself, sending cascades of dirt falling into the ground. She opened her eyes to find that, despite the ring of dirt around her, her normally white coat was still a light brown. Maybe, Trixie smirked. We should have something to eat. The showmare gave Spike a meaningful look. The dragon, having watched the training with a great deal of amusement, rolled his eyes. Fine, fine, Spike muttered half-heartedly. I'll make you some daisy sandwiches. He sighed as he stood up and walked back towards town. Thankful for the rest, Sweetie collapsed on the grass. She didn't think about anything else, content to watch the clouds pass overhead. However, passing Pegasus in the distance brought more painful memories. Scootaloo and Applebloom hate me, she said finally. Applebloom thinks I lied to avoid getting punished, and Scootaloo thinks I don't care about them at all. They think that you're their Sweetie Belle. To them, you were here a couple days ago playing around, Trixie said, sitting next to her. We'll have to clear it up before we send you on your way to find Twilight.